Hey everyone, my name is John. 5 months ago, I couldn't speak a single full sentence in English. Not even something as simple as, "How are you?" Without stopping. Without translating in my head. Without feeling that tight pressure in my chest that made every word feel heavy. I knew English words. I had studied English for years. I could read. I could write short answers. I could pass exams. But when it came to speaking, real speaking, I was silent. And the worst part wasn't that I made mistakes. The worst part was that I never even got the chance to make them. My mind froze before my mouth opened. I would rehearse sentences in my head, rearrange grammar rules, question every tense, every preposition, every word order. And by the time I was ready, the moment had already passed. The conversation moved on without me. People looked at me, waited politely for a second, and then continued talking to someone else. That silence slowly started to define how I saw myself. I avoided conversations. I avoided phone calls. I avoided situations where English was required. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because speaking felt dangerous. Like walking onto a stage without knowing your lines. One wrong move and everyone would see how bad you really are. For a long time, I told myself a comforting lie. I said, I just need more grammar, more rules, more structure, more studying. I truly believed that one day, after enough grammar books, something would click. That fluency would magically appear once I mastered every rule. But what actually happened was the opposite. The more grammar I studied, the quieter I became. This is the story of how I realized that grammar wasn't helping me speak. It was stopping me. And how letting go of it changed everything. Lesson 1. Why grammar made me silent. When people hear me say grammar made me silent, they usually get confused. Grammar is supposed to help, right? Grammar is supposed to make your English correct, clear, and professional. That's what we're taught from this beginning. But no one talks about what grammar does inside your head when you try to speak in real time. Here's what grammar did to me. Every time I wanted to say something simple, my brain turned it into a problem to solve, not a message to communicate, an equation. Before opening my mouth, I would think, is this present simple or present continuous? Should I use have been or was? Is this sentence formal or informal? Is this how a native speaker would say it? What if this sounds strange? What if I sound stupid? All of that happened in seconds. And while my brain was busy checking rules, my mouth stayed closed. Speaking stopped being natural. It became mechanical, slow, stressful. I remember one specific moment that made this painfully clear. I was in a small group conversation. Nothing serious, just casual talk. Someone asked me a simple question about my weekend. I knew the answer instantly. I lived the weekend. I experienced it. But instead of answering, my mind jumped straight into grammar mode. I tried to build the perfect sentence. Past simple. Correct order. No mistakes. By the time I finished building the sentence in my head, the silence was already awkward. Someone else answered. The topic changed. And I sat there, angry at myself. Not because I didn't know English, but because I couldn't use it when it mattered. That's when I started noticing a pattern. The people who spoke the most weren't the people with the best grammar. They were the people who didn't stop to think. They spoke first, corrected later, or never. They weren't fluent because they were perfect. They were fluent because they were free. Grammar had trained me to be careful, not confident. It taught me to prioritize correctness over communication. And communication doesn't wait. Conversations don't pause while you search for the correct tense. Real life doesn't give you time to analyze rules. You either speak or you disappear. The more grammar I studied, the more pressure I put on every sentence. I felt like every word represented my intelligence. One mistake meant failure. One wrong sentence meant I didn't deserve to speak. That mindset slowly killed my voice. What no one tells you is this: grammar is slow. Speaking is fast. When you try to use grammar while speaking, you're asking your brain to do something it's not designed to do under pressure. Native speakers don't run grammar checks in their heads. They speak from patterns, habits, and repetition. Grammar is something you analyze after, not something you calculate before. Once I understood that, something shifted. I realized that grammar wasn't my foundation. It was my cage. And the first step to speaking wasn't learning more rules. It was learning how to let go of them. Lesson 2. The fear that controlled my voice. After I realized that grammar was making me silent, I thought the problem was solved. I believed that once I stopped obsessing over rules, speaking would become easy. But something strange happened. Even when I decided to speak freely, my voice still wouldn't come out. My throat tightened. My chest felt heavy. My mind went blank. That's when I understood something deeper was controlling me. Not grammar, but fear. This fear didn't come from one big failure. It was built slowly, over years. Every time someone corrected me in front of others. Every time someone smiled politely after I said something wrong. Every time I saw confusion on someone's face when I spoke. My brain recorded those moments and turned them into warnings. Speak carefully. Don't embarrass yourself. Stay quiet if you're not sure. Fear doesn't shout. It whispers. It tells you to wait, to prepare more, to speak later. And later never comes. I started noticing how fear worked inside me. When I was alone, I could speak English to myself. I could form sentences. I could explain ideas. But the moment another person appeared, everything changed. My heart rate increased. My breathing became shallow. My thoughts raced. Fear turned English into a test instead of a tool. The worst part was that fear made everything personal. A grammar mistake wasn't just a mistake. It felt like proof that I wasn't smart enough. A pronunciation error felt like everyone was judging me. Fear convinced me that people were listening to my English, not my message. And once you believe that, speaking becomes exhausting. I also realized that fear made me overestimate consequences. In my head, one wrong sentence could ruin everything. In reality, most people didn't care. They just wanted to understand me. But fear doesn't care about reality. It only cares about protection. It tries to keep you safe by keeping you silent. One day, I asked myself an uncomfortable question. What was I actually afraid of? Was it grammar mistakes? Accent? Or was it the feeling of being seen as imperfect? The answer hurt, but it was honest. I was afraid of looking stupid. I was afraid of being exposed. I was afraid of losing control. That's when I understood something important. Fluency isn't blocked by lack of knowledge. It's blocked by emotional resistance. You can know thousands of words and still be silent if fear controls your voice. And no amount of studying can fix fear. Fear is not an academic problem. It's a psychological one. Once I accepted that, my focus changed. Instead of asking, how do I speak correctly? I started asking, how do I feel safe speaking imperfectly? That single shift changed my entire approach to learning English. Fear didn't disappear overnight. But the moment I stopped fighting it and started understanding it, it began to lose its power. And that opened the door to the next lesson. The moment I did something that felt completely wrong, but ended up saving my English. Lesson 3. The day I stopped studying grammar. There was a day that quietly changed everything for me. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big decision, no motivation speech, no sudden confidence. I was simply tired. Tired of studying grammar. Tired of memorizing rules. Tired of feeling almost ready, but never actually speaking. That day, I closed my grammar book and didn't open it again. Not because grammar was useless, but because it had stopped helping me move forward. For a long time, grammar felt like safety. It gave me structure. It gave me the illusion of control. I believed that if I learned enough rules, speaking would eventually feel natural. But the truth was uncomfortable. The more grammar I studied, the more afraid I became of making mistakes. Grammar didn't give me confidence. It gave me hesitation. Every sentence turned into a calculation. Every word choice felt risky. My brain was busy checking rules instead of expressing thoughts. When I stopped studying grammar, something strange happened. At first, I felt lost. I felt like I was doing something wrong, something irresponsible. Years of education had trained me to believe that learning a language meant studying grammar first. So not doing it felt like breaking a rule. But slowly, that discomfort turned into relief. My mind became quieter. I stopped correcting myself before finishing a sentence. I started speaking more, even if it wasn't perfect. Instead of asking, "Is this sentence correct?" I began asking, "Does this sentence communicate what I mean?" That question changed everything. Communication became the goal, not correctness. And when communication becomes the goal, fear loses its grip. I started listening more than studying. I listened to how people actually spoke, not how textbooks said they should speak. I noticed patterns. I noticed repetition. I noticed that native speakers didn't speak in perfect grammar all the time. They paused, they simplified, they made mistakes, and no one cared. Conversation flowed because meaning mattered more than form. Without grammar in the way, my brain started doing something natural. It began absorbing structure unconsciously. I wasn't memorizing rules, but I was internalizing them. I didn't know the name of the tense I was using, but I knew when it sounded right. Just like a child learns their first language, not through explanations, but through exposure and use. This didn't mean I became fluent overnight. I still made mistakes. I still struggled for words. But now I was speaking while struggling instead of staying silent while preparing. And that made all the difference. Every conversation became practice. Every mistake became feedback. Every interaction moved me forward. Stopping grammar didn't make me worse at English. It made me braver. And bravery is what fluency actually needs. Grammar can be learned later. Confidence cannot be learned from a book. It can only be built through action. That day, when I stopped studying grammar, I didn't quit learning English. I finally started using it. And that decision led me to the next lesson. The moment I understood that immersion mattered more than education. Lesson 4. Learning English by listening, not rules. The moment I stopped treating English like a subject and started treating it like a sound, everything began to change. Before that, my entire relationship with English was built on rules. Tenses, structures, Correct order, mistakes to avoid. Every sentence felt like a test I could fail. My brain was always busy checking rules instead of understanding meaning. I could read grammar explanations for hours, but when someone spoke to me in real life, my mind froze. The words came too fast, the rhythm felt unfamiliar, and I couldn't keep up. It felt like people were speaking a different version of English that no textbook had prepared me for. One day, I realized something uncomfortable but honest. Babies don't learn language by studying rules, and yet they become fluent. They listen long before they speak. They absorb sounds, patterns, pauses, emotions. They understand meaning without translating. I had done the exact opposite. I tried to speak before my ears were trained. I expected my mouth to perform without giving my brain the raw material it needed. That's when I made a quiet decision. I would stop chasing grammar perfection and start feeding my brain with English through listening. At first, listening was frustrating. I understood maybe 20% of what I heard. Movies felt too fast. Podcasts sounded like noise. Native speakers swallowed words, connected sounds, changed pronunciation. But instead of quitting, I changed my goal. I stopped listening to understand everything. I listened to get used to the sound. I played the same content again and again. Not actively studying, not pausing every sentence, just letting English play in the background while walking, cooking, commuting. Slowly, without effort, my brain began to recognize patterns. Certain phrases started to feel familiar. Intonation made sense. I could predict what was coming next even when I didn't know every word. Something important happened during this phase. My inner translator started getting weaker. Earlier, every English sentence had to pass through my native language before I could understand it. Now meaning started arriving directly. I didn't know why a sentence was correct, but I knew it sounded right. And that was new. That was powerful. Listening gave me intuition, something grammar never gave me. I stopped asking, "Which tense is this?" and started feeling whether a sentence worked or not. The more I listened, the more natural English became. My fear reduced. My confidence grew quietly. I wasn't memorizing rules anymore, but I was building instinct. And instinct is what real conversations run on. Looking back, this lesson was a turning point. Learning English by listening didn't just improve my comprehension. It rewired how my brain interacted with the language. From that moment on, English was no longer a problem to solve. It was a sound to live with. Lesson 5. Speaking without translating in my head. For a long time, my biggest enemy wasn't vocabulary or grammar. It was translation. Every time I tried to speak English, my brain worked in 2 steps. First, I formed the sentence in my native language. Then I tried to translate it into English. By the time I reached the second step, the conversation had already moved on. People were waiting. Silence grew uncomfortable. And I felt stupid, even though I knew exactly what I wanted to say. This habit destroyed my confidence. I wasn't slow because I lacked intelligence. I was slow because my brain was overloaded. Translation is heavy mental work. It forces you to think about words instead of meaning. That's why I could write better than I could speak. Writing gives you time. Speaking doesn't. Real conversations don't wait for translation. The breaking point came during a simple moment. Someone asked me a basic question. "What did you do yesterday?" I knew the answer perfectly, but inside my head, chaos started. I translated word by word. I checked tense. I worried about mistakes. And finally, I said almost nothing. That's when I understood a painful truth. If I continued translating, I would never sound natural. I would never be fluent. So I tried something uncomfortable. I forced myself to answer questions immediately without translating, even if the sentence was broken, even if it was simple, even if it was wrong. I started with very basic thoughts. I worked. I ate. I watched a movie. No perfection, no correction, just direct response. At first it felt scary. My brain resisted. It wanted safety. It wanted rules. But I ignored that voice. I spoke before thinking too much. And something strange happened. My sentences became faster, short but fast, then slightly longer, then smoother. My brain started connecting English directly to meaning, not to my native language. I also practiced speaking to myself, out loud, not in my head. When I was alone, I described what I was doing. I'm making coffee. The water is hot. I'm tired today. It felt silly at first, but it removed pressure. No audience, no judgment, just practice. This daily habit trained my brain to think in English automatically. Over time, translation faded. Not completely, but enough. I stopped hearing my native language first. English started arriving on its own. And with that change, my confidence grew. I wasn't searching for perfect sentences anymore. I was communicating. And that was the moment I realized something important. Fluency is not about correctness. Fluency is about flow. Lesson 6. Making mistakes. Without shame. For most of my life, I believed mistakes were something to avoid, especially in English. Every mistake felt like proof that I wasn't smart enough, talented enough, or good at languages. So I tried to protect myself. I spoke less. I chose safer words. Sometimes I stayed silent, even when I had something important to say. I thought silence was better than sounding wrong. But silence has a cost. The more silent I became, the more fear grew inside me. I watched other people speak freely, laugh at their mistakes, correct themselves, and move on. And I stayed stuck. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. Mistakes weren't stopping me. Shame was. I remembered one moment clearly. I said a sentence with the wrong tense. The other person understood me perfectly, but my face burned. My heart raced. I replayed that mistake in my head for hours. Meanwhile, the listener had already forgotten it. That's when the truth hit me. People don't care about your mistakes as much as you do. So I made a decision. I would stop protecting my ego and start protecting my progress. I allowed myself to be wrong, on purpose. I spoke even when I wasn't sure. I stopped apologizing after every sentence. I stopped saying sorry for my English. Those words kept me small. Instead, I focused on one thing: clarity. If the message was clear, the sentence was good enough. I noticed that native speakers make mistakes all the time. They correct themselves. They restart sentences. They simplify. And nobody judges them. Why was I holding myself to a higher standard than natives? I also changed how I reacted to mistakes. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I treated them like signals. A mistake showed me what to improve. It gave me feedback. And feedback is gold. Without mistakes, there is no adjustment. Without adjustment, there is no growth. One powerful shift helped me a lot. I stopped calling them mistakes. I started calling them attempts. Every time I spoke, I wasn't failing. I was attempting. And attempts always move you forward. Slowly, shame lost its power. I laughed more. I spoke more. I corrected myself naturally without panic. And something unexpected happened. The fewer emotions I attached to mistakes, the fewer mistakes I made. My brain relaxed, and a relaxed brain learns faster. This lesson changed everything. Because once shame disappears, practice becomes easy. And when practice becomes easy, improvement becomes inevitable. Lesson 7. How daily habits changed my English. For a long time, I believed improvement came from big actions, long study sessions, intense motivation, perfect plans. But my life didn't work that way. I was busy, tired, sometimes unmotivated. And whenever I missed a perfect study day, I felt like I was failing again. That's when I realized something simple but powerful. My English wouldn't change because of what I did once in a while. It would change because of what I did every day. So I stopped chasing motivation and started designing habits. Small ones, almost boring ones. Habits so easy that skipping them felt strange. Every morning, I spoke to myself in English for a few minutes. Not rehearsed speeches, just real thoughts. What I was doing, how I felt, what I planned to do next. At first it felt awkward, even childish. But I reminded myself, no one was listening. This was my private training ground. I changed how I consumed content too. Instead of random videos, I listened to the same type of English every day, same accents, same pace, same style. My brain stopped struggling and started recognizing patterns. Words began to feel familiar, not foreign. I also made English part of my environment. My phone, my notes, my reminders. English wasn't something I visited. It was something I lived with. Even when I was tired, English was still there, quietly working in the background. One habit surprised me the most. Consistency mattered more than intensity. 10 minutes every day beat 2 hours once a week. My brain trusted repetition. It learned through exposure, not pressure. Some days felt useless. I didn't feel improvement. I didn't feel smarter. But I kept going. And then one day, without warning, something clicked. I answered without translating. I reacted without pausing. English came out before fear had time to stop it. That's when I understood. Daily habits don't feel powerful in the moment. They feel powerful in hindsight. English didn't change overnight. I changed slowly, quietly, through habits so small they felt invisible. But those invisible habits reshaped how I thought, listened, and spoke. And once English became a habit, not a task, fluency stopped feeling impossible. It started feeling inevitable. Lesson 8. When I stopped translating and started thinking in English. There was a moment in my journey when I realized my biggest enemy was not vocabulary, not grammar, not pronunciation. It was translation. Every sentence had to pass through my native language first. English entered my ears, went into my head, got translated, rearranged, judged, and only then came out of my mouth. By that time, the conversation was already gone. I used to think this was normal. I thought everyone learned like this. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong. Fluent speakers didn't look like they were translating. They reacted. They responded. They flowed. So I decided to change one thing. Not my English level, but my thinking process. Instead of asking, "What does this mean in my language?" I started asking, "What situation is this used in?" I didn't memorize meanings anymore. I memorized feelings, contexts, moments. I learned English the way children learn, through exposure, not explanation. When I heard, "I'm running late," I didn't translate it. I imagined myself rushing, checking the time, feeling stressed. The phrase became a picture, not a sentence. When someone said, "That makes sense," I didn't search for meaning. I felt agreement, understanding, acceptance. Slowly, English stopped being a code to decode. It became a direct experience. I also trained my brain intentionally. I forced myself to stay in English, even when it felt uncomfortable. When I didn't know a word, I didn't escape to my language. I described it. I went around it. I stayed inside English, even if it was broken. Especially when it was broken. At first, my thoughts were simple. Very simple. I am tired. I need food. Today was long. But simplicity was freedom. There was no pressure, no performance, just thinking. Over time, those simple thoughts grew longer, clearer, more natural. One day, I noticed something strange. I was thinking in English without trying. Not all the time, not perfectly, but enough to feel real progress. That was the turning point. The moment you stop translating is the moment English becomes yours. Not borrowed, not memorized, yours. Fluency doesn't come when you know more words. It comes when your brain stops switching languages and starts living in one. And once that switch happens, speaking no longer feels like work. It feels like expression. Lesson 9. Confidence before correctness. For a long time, I believed that confidence came after correctness. I thought first I needed perfect grammar, perfect sentences, perfect pronunciation, and only then I would be allowed to feel confident. So every time I wanted to speak English, my mind stopped me before my mouth could even open. I would silently ask myself, is this sentence correct? Is the tense right? What if they laugh? And in that pause, the moment passed. The conversation moved on without me. I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was waiting to be perfect. What I didn't realize back then was that this belief was slowly killing my voice. I wasn't learning English. I was hiding from it. Every mistake felt dangerous. Every wrong word felt like proof that I didn't belong. I watched other people speak with broken sentences, wrong grammar, heavy accents, but they were understood. They were confident, and somehow people listened to them. That confused me. I was trying so hard to be correct, yet I was invisible. They were incorrect, yet alive in the conversation. The turning point came when I noticed something uncomfortable. The people who improved fastest were not the ones who studied the most grammar. They were the ones who spoke the most, even when they were wrong. They didn't wait for confidence to appear. They created it by speaking. Confidence wasn't the reward for correctness. It was the fuel that made improvement possible. I started paying attention to my own body when I spoke. My shoulders were tense. My jaw was tight. My breath was shallow. I wasn't communicating. I was performing under fear. So I made a quiet decision. I told myself that for a while, correctness would no longer be my priority. My only goal was to finish my sentence, even if it was wrong, even if it sounded strange, even if it wasn't perfect. At first, this felt terrifying. Saying an incorrect sentence out loud felt like jumping without a safety net. But something unexpected happened. People didn't stop me. They didn't mock me. Most of the time, they understood me anyway. And when they didn't, they asked questions. The conversation continued. The world didn't end. That was a shock. With every imperfect sentence, something inside me relaxed. My voice became steadier. My thoughts flowed faster. I stopped translating every word in my head because I no longer needed permission from grammar to speak. I began to trust myself, not because I was correct, but because I was brave enough to try. That's when I understood the real order of learning a language. Confidence doesn't come after correctness. Correctness comes because of confidence. When you speak with confidence, you get feedback. You hear better sentences. You notice patterns naturally. Your brain adjusts without pressure. But when you wait to be correct before speaking, you never give your brain the chance to grow. This lesson changed how I saw mistakes. Mistakes were no longer signs of failure. They were signs of movement. Silence was the real enemy. Silence was the place where English couldn't reach me. So I chose confidence, even messy confidence, over perfect silence. Once I did that, everything accelerated. My fluency improved. My listening improved. My pronunciation improved. Not because I studied harder, but because I finally allowed myself to participate. I stopped asking, "Is this correct?" and started asking, "Can they understand me?" That single shift unlocked my voice. Looking back, I wish I had learned this earlier. I wasted so much time trying to sound perfect instead of sounding human. English is not a test, it's a tool. And tools only work when you use them. Confidence before correctness didn't make me careless. It made me free. And freedom is where real learning begins. Lesson 10. What truly helped me become fluent? For a long time, I kept asking myself one question. What actually made the difference? Not what sounded impressive. Not what people on the internet recommended. Not what looked productive. I wanted the honest answer. When I looked back at my journey, stripped away the noise, one truth became very clear. Fluency didn't come from one method, one book, or one moment. It came from a shift in how I lived with English every single day. What truly helped me become fluent was stopping the idea that English was something I studied and accepting that English was something I lived. Before that shift, English existed only in study time. I would sit down, learn English, then close the book and return to my real life in my native language. English was a visitor, not a resident, and visitors never stay long enough to become natural. The moment English became part of my daily life, everything changed. I stopped separating learning from living. English followed me into the shower, into the kitchen, into my walks, into my thoughts. I talked to myself in English when no one was listening. I described what I was doing. I explained my feelings. I replayed conversations in my head and imagined better responses. Not because someone told me to, but because English finally felt useful, not academic. Another thing that truly helped was letting go of speed as a goal. I didn't try to sound fluent. I tried to sound honest. When I didn't know a word, I didn't freeze. I explained around it. I used simpler words. I kept moving. This trained my brain to stay in English instead of escaping back to translation. Fluency didn't come from knowing more words. It came from staying calm inside the language. Listening also played a deeper role than I expected. Not passive listening, not background noise, but focused listening with curiosity. I listened to real people speaking real English. I didn't try to understand every word. I listened for rhythm, emotion, pauses, and tone. Slowly, my brain stopped hearing English as a foreign sound and started hearing it as meaning. That's when understanding became automatic instead of forced. But the most important part, the part people rarely talk about, was identity. At some point, I stopped saying, I am learning English, and started saying, I speak English, even when I wasn't good at it yet. That sentence changed how I behaved. I showed up differently. I took more risks. I stopped asking for permission to speak. I allowed myself to be a beginner without being ashamed. Fluency didn't arrive suddenly. There was no magical day when everything became perfect. It crept in quietly. One day I realized I was thinking in English without trying. Another day I noticed I had finished a conversation without translating. Another day I laughed at a joke in English without delay. These moments didn't feel dramatic, but together, they meant everything. What truly helped me become fluent was consistency without pressure, curiosity without fear, confidence without perfection. I didn't chase fluency. I built a relationship with the language. And like any real relationship, it grew through presence, patience, and honesty. Looking back now, I understand something very simple. English didn't change because I studied harder. English changed because I stopped treating it like a subject and started treating it like a voice. My voice. And once I trusted that voice, fluency was no longer something I was chasing. It was something I was becoming. If there is one thing I want you to remember from this story, it's this. English did not change for me. I changed the way I learned English. The moment I stopped treating English like a school subject full of rules, exams, and fear, it started becoming a language I could actually use. I didn't become fluent because I memorized grammar. I became fluent because I used English every day, imperfectly, honestly, and without shame. If you're watching this and you feel stuck, frustrated, or embarrassed when you try to speak, please understand this. Nothing is wrong with you. You are not slow. You are not bad at languages. You were just taught the wrong way. Fluency doesn't come from knowing every rule. It comes from listening, using, repeating, and trusting yourself enough to speak even when it's not perfect. So don't wait until you know enough grammar. Start now. Speak now. Make mistakes now. Because confidence comes before correctness, and fluency comes from courage, not perfection. If I could do this without studying grammar, so can you. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, this is not the end of your English journey. This is the beginning.